Hi, everyone. This is our last major topic of the semester, and that topic is ecology. We are going to talk a little bit about the basic principles of ecology, although this will be a very, very abbreviated lecture on ecology. So I hope that at some point you take a course that goes into more detail on this very important topic. And we'll also talk a little bit about some major environmental concerns and things that you can do in your own life to possibly make a small difference in what's happening on this planet today. As an undergraduate student at San Diego State, I was in the last year of my biology degree program, and I had purposely put off taking my ecology course that was required of all bio majors. And at the same time, I had decided I wanted to go into a master's program. So I met with the graduate advisor and I said, I'm not sure what I want to study yet in graduate school, but I do know I do not have any interest at all in ecology. Well, what do you know? That's what I ended up studying in graduate school because I took the ecology course and I was immediately just completely captivated by the connections among all living organisms on this earth and the connections that living organisms have to non-living factors in the environment. And then, of course, the impact that humans are having on this planet. So I hope that many of you will go on to look at some of these topics in more detail. I am going to just give you, again, a very brief version of the ecology story and talk a little bit about some major environmental issues that you should be concerned about as a citizen of this planet. So, what is ecology? For some reason, my slides are not advancing, but here we go. Let's see if we can get this to work. Ecology is the study of how organisms interact with each other and with the non-living factors in their environment. If you remember earlier in the semester, biotic factors are living and abiotic factors are non-living. So things such as climate and mineral availability, water, sunlight, all these non-living factors in the environment that affect living organisms. And there are some major principles of ecology that are important to know about. We're just going to briefly touch on these concepts today. But for me, what really interested me as a student is that everything is connected to everything else. And so it's really important to realize that we never just affect one thing or one organism. If you affect one organism, you affect every other organism that is connected in this web of life. So to me, that was really, really interesting and really makes sense. And that was the other thing I loved about ecology is it's really just common sense. All of these concepts really are very logical. Not much to memorize, it really just all makes a lot of sense. The second law of ecology talks about the fact that everything must go somewhere. So think about your trash. Think about everything we use on this planet that needs to go somewhere. Even when you burn something, it doesn't completely disappear. That smoke goes somewhere, those pollutants go somewhere. And then 3 and 4, nature knows best, and there's no such thing as a free lunch. There's a cost to everything we do on this planet, and it's important to realize that. And ultimately, humans don't decide how it's all going to turn out. It's nature that decides that. And these 4 laws of ecology were originally stated by a man named Barry Commoner, who was really who we consider to be the father of ecology in the modern day environmental movement. He was really the first person to very publicly bring these ideas to the forefront. And he was Harvard educated, also went to Columbia, taught for many years, and was really the person to first explain these principles. So ecology is really the study of these relationships between organisms and their environment and the balances among these relationships. And you can study ecology on a lot of different levels, starting at the individual level. And then the next order of organization would be the population level, and then community, then ecosystem, and then looking at the whole biosphere, which is all the ecosystems on Earth together. So these would be the big issues in the biosphere, such as global climate change. We talked about the definitions of species, population, community, ecosystem, biosphere. We talked about those definitions in the very first lecture of the semester. So if you really want the definitions of those, you need to go back to that very first lecture on how biology is organized or studied and look at those definitions again. I'm just going to briefly talk to you about population and community ecology and how an ecologist would study these types of issues and look at these relationships. So let's start with population level. So just to quickly remind you, I told you you need to look back for these definitions, but I am going to give you a couple of them. So population is a group of organisms of the same species living in the same place at the same time. So they're all competing with each other for resources, they're mating, they're all affected by the same factors. And so this is an important unit in which to really study ecology. These are, of course, meerkats. So just quickly looking at some of the things a population ecologist would study. Demographics, density, dispersion, survivorship curves, age structure. So let's look just real briefly at what some of these things mean. So demographics is really looking at birth rates and death rates. But it gets a little more complex, as I'll show you on the next slide, but it's really the study of the vital statistics of a population and how they change over time. So not just looking, though, at birth and death rates, because there are really two ways that individuals can come into a population. One is through birth, but one is through immigration. So new individuals moving into that population from somewhere else. And then the way individuals leave that population, sadly, through death, because all living organisms at some point die, everything has a lifespan, or leaving the population, which is emigration with an EM instead of an IMM. So those are the kinds of things that a population ecologist would study. Density is really the number of individuals per unit area. So looking at how dense populations are in certain areas, not just of humans, but of all living organisms. But this map is interesting. It just really shows the density of humans just in the United States is shown by lights that are on. And you can see really this big area of the country where there aren't many people, and then they tend to really be clustered, especially on the coasts. So density is an important factor that population ecologists would study. Dispersion is how they're spaced, and that is an interesting thing to look at as well, because they can either be clumped, like you see these starfish. They can be more uniform in distribution because maybe they have a certain territory that they're defending, or it can just be random. Another way that population ecologists can study populations is by looking at survivorship curves, which show the likelihood of individuals in a species being alive at a specific age. So this shows three different possible survivorship curves, with humans representing type 1, birds representing type 2, and trees representing type 3. So what do these mean? Well, this shows a little bit more detail. So humans are in this type 1, which really shows a pretty high survivorship throughout life, with the majority of those individuals reaching maturity. So not many dying when they're young, more dying later in life. Okay, birds really equal chance of dying throughout their lifetime. So as many juveniles dying as adults. But then trees have a lot of early loss. But once they reach maturity, they're going to live a long life. So really three different types of survivorship curves. You don't need to know the details of these three. I'm just showing you that this really is just another way that population ecologists would study their topic. Okay, population growth curves are interesting. There are really two shapes. One is called a J-shaped curve and one is called an S-shaped curve. What causes something to reach this S shape is that, in concept, all populations of organisms in their environment reach what's called the carrying capacity. And the carrying capacity is the maximum population size that an ecosystem can support. At this carrying capacity, resources become limited, and populations might overshoot that a little bit and then come back down, and it kind of tends to fluctuate around that carrying capacity. So they have too many babies, that's more than the ecosystem can support, so some die off. So you'll have a little bit of a dip, then it starts to recover and come back up again, and you'll just see it move along like that. Humans are getting closer to the carrying capacity of this earth, but unfortunately, human population growth is still what we call a J shape, meaning it's exponential growth. It hasn't reached the carrying capacity yet, so it's just continuing to increase. And you can see this increase in human population over time. There are countries right now that are experiencing zero or negative population growth as birth rates are declining. So that is a good thing. But globally, obviously, humans are still continuing to increase. Age structure of a population is really interesting to study in all living organisms, but this just shows in humans, 3 different countries and what those age structures look like. What this helps us do is predict future population size. So if you have a lot of young individuals in a population, you can expect that over time, there are going to be more individuals in the population. Or if you have a lot of individuals in their reproductive years, then we can predict that that population is most likely going to increase in size over time. But if you have a lot of older individuals, such as this one in Italy, you can expect that over time, this population is going to decline in size. You see fewer young individuals and more aging individuals. So as these die off, there aren't any youngsters to reproduce and increase the numbers again. You can see this picture of Afghanistan, a lot of young people. So we would expect at a certain point, this population is going to explode in numbers. So those would all be examples of population ecology and things that population ecologists would study. And again, not just in humans, in all living organisms. For me, community level is incredibly interesting because this is all the populations of organisms living together in one area, all interacting with each other. So it's a really integrated unit, and it's often considered by community ecologists to be more of a superorganism. It's really more than the sum of its parts. And for me, as an ecologist, this was really, really incredibly interesting. So, not going into all possible topics of community ecology, but just to kind of give you a flavor of things that community ecologists would study. Food webs. So, looking at these tight connections that all living organisms have through eating and those different trophic levels that exist in an ecosystem. So, looking from the very smallest producers all the way up to the top carnivores, and really realizing you never just affect one organism. If we took one organism out of this food web, we would affect every other level that relies on the prior. And this brings us to the topic of trophic cascades. In a trophic cascade, if a top predator, so the top level of carnivores, if they're taken out of an ecosystem or even just reduced in an ecosystem, what that allows to happen is now if these predators get reduced or even eliminated, now the number of herbivores is going to increase dramatically, and they're going to overfeed, and now there aren't enough plants available at the base of the food chain, and this entire ecosystem is going to collapse. There's actually a very important video that I have posted a link to called How Wolves Change Rivers, and it's a very significant example of a trophic cascade that happened in the Yellowstone ecosystem when wolves were removed from this ecosystem, and then how that ecosystem changed back when the wolves were reintroduced. So please, please watch that video as a really great example of a trophic cascade, and just realizing how everything is so connected in these communities of organisms. Community ecologists really look at symbiotic relationships among organisms. So, mutualism is when both organisms benefit. So, for example, in pollination, bees get nectar and the flower gets pollinated. In commensalism, one organism benefits while the other is unaffected. So, a barnacle on a whale, this helps the barnacle get food, but the whale's really not benefited or harmed from this relationship. And then relationships such as parasitism or predation, where one benefits at the cost of the other. So in this case, the tick is feeding on the cat blood, and the cat is getting sick or getting irritated skin or is in some way being harmed. So these really tight knit relationships that have developed over time would be something that a community ecologist would study. For me, this was really the most interesting topic, and that is how organisms evolve in response to each other. And that's exactly how these tight knit relationships have formed. And you can see this hummingbird has a beak that perfectly fits into this flower. So this hummingbird is one of the only organisms that can get the nectar from this flower. The way this plant benefits is if this is the only pollinator that comes and visits the flower, you can guarantee then that your pollen is going to go to another flower of your same species rather than being wasted on a completely different plant altogether that doesn't need your pollen. So if this hummingbird really
The
has
next
a limited number
item
of food
or
plants
the
that it can get nectar from because the beak size perfectly fits the flowers, then the benefit to the plant is again, it's going to ensure pollination. When this hummingbird comes in for the nectar, it inadvertently picks up the pollen from the flower and it's then going to deliver it to another flower of the same species. So, coevolution definition wise, is change in genetic traits of one species in response to change in genetic traits of another species. So, herbivores and plants are a really great example of this. Herbivores eat plants, and so they have developed special ways to be able to effectively eat the plants. At the same time, plants have developed defenses against being eaten. So, things like waxes and thorns, tasting bad, all these chemicals that plants can produce that make them distasteful or even toxic to herbivores. Those would be really good examples of coevolution. Pollinators and plants, we just talked about. Predators and prey. As prey become better at escaping, predators must become better at catching them. So, constantly evolving in response to each other. Parasites and hosts. As hosts develop defenses against parasites, parasites must get better at specializing on a host, getting transmitted to another host, things like that. For me, one of the most interesting stories in all of biology is how certain organisms have developed the ability to use a food resource that other organisms can't. And they've now reduced competition for that plant or that other food source because they're one of the only organisms that can actually use it. And the monarch butterfly is a really great example of this. And they've taken it to even another level that I'll explain in a minute. But this is milkweed. Milkweed produces chemicals that are pretty toxic to most herbivores. So it's not really widely eaten. But the monarch butterfly has caterpillars that can actually eat milkweed. So now they have a food source with very limited competition for that resource. Not only that, but these caterpillars can actually sequester the toxin from the milkweed, store it in their tissues, and now, as a juvenile and as an adult, they taste bad to predators. So a bird will come along and eat one of these caterpillars or even eat an adult monarch, and they'll get very sick and spit it out, and they learn what those look like and they avoid them. So now, not only do they have a food resource with lower competition for that resource, but now they have protection against predation by sequestering those toxins in their tissues. Now, this is even crazier. Mimicry has occurred where the viceroy butterfly doesn't eat milkweed and doesn't sequester those chemicals, but looks like a monarch and is therefore protected from being eaten by the fact that it mimics the monarch, looks just like it in color pattern. So a bird that has ever eaten a monarch will also avoid a viceroy, even though they are not actually toxic. So these kinds of coevolutionary um, relationships among organisms are really, really cool to study. And then the next level of organization at which we can study ecology is looking at the whole ecosystem. So looking at not just the community, which would be all of those living factors, all the living organisms interacting with each other and all these close-knit relationships, but also looking at those non-living or abiotic factors that affect them. That would be looking at the whole ecosystem. And then ecosystems, obviously, you can study a lot of different things in an ecosystem, and there are many different types of ecosystems on Earth that greatly differ from each other. And then, of course, if we look at all the ecosystems together, that would be looking at the biosphere and those big global issues that affect the biosphere, things such as global climate change. Okay, now let's talk briefly about the environment and just some of the major issues that you can actually do something about. So I often have students ask me, well, it seems like these global problems we're having are so big, and there's really not much I as an individual can do because these issues are so much bigger than me and how I'm living my life on this planet. So I'm not sure that I can really make a difference, but I think we actually can make a difference in how we affect the earth and our everyday decisions and how we live our lives. So I'm going to just to give you a few ideas for things that you can do. I also want to say that there's zero judgment in this lecture. Okay, so we're all humans on this planet. We've all done things that damage the planet just by being here. And so, no matter how good we try to be, we live in a first world country where we have a huge ecological footprint just based on the fact that we live in the United States. We lead a pretty luxurious life compared to other people on this planet. And so just by that alone, we've all done things that are damaging to the planet. That's just the nature of the game. So please don't, send me the hate emails or post negative comments because I'm really not judging anyone. I've done all these things too. So I'm just trying to give you some ideas of things that we could do differently and better. And we're not all perfect at it, but these are just some ideas for things that we could do better. So first, let's just look at the list of major causes of environmental destruction. One of the biggest ones being habitat destruction. Of course, pollution, plastics, which we will talk about a little bit, global warming or global climate change, meat production through industrialized farming, overfishing, overpopulation, food waste, and invasive or introduced species that are non-native to an area. I'm not going to hit on all of these. Obviously, not bringing in invasive species. I'm not sure that many of us do that intentionally. We might accidentally do that when we're hiking in some area and we bring a non-native species in on our shoes or our clothing and it starts taking over an area. A lot of that's not intentional. I don't think most people are going to bring a non-native fish and dump it in a lake and cause environmental destruction that way. So some of these I'm not really going to hit on a whole lot, but one thing that's really happening, all of these things are contributing to a huge problem, and that is a reduction in biodiversity. So, what is biodiversity? Well, biodiversity is the variety of life on Earth. The number of different species is one way that we can look at that, but really there are three different types of biodiversity that we can look at. One is just the genetic diversity within a population of organisms. So, if you've had a lecture on natural selection, you know that really for the long-term survival of any population of organisms, genetic diversity is incredibly important because you need individuals who are going to be able to adapt or survive changes in the environment. Otherwise, one type of fungal infection or one virus or one change in climate could cause everybody in that population to go extinct. And we as humans, when we do habitat destruction or we hunt or overfish populations of organisms down to very small numbers, it's not just about the number of individuals that are left. If we dramatically reduce the genetic diversity of that population, it's very vulnerable to extinction. Again, there could just be one factor that changes that could wipe out everyone in that population. So maintaining genetic diversity is a really, really important part of biodiversity. The number of species within an ecosystem would be the species diversity. That is also very important, and that is one thing we're really having a global impact on. As we commit all of these offenses to the environment, we are really causing a dramatic reduction in the number of species of living organisms on this planet. And then the number of ecosystems. Certain ecosystems are more at risk than others. For example, wetlands globally have seriously declined by over 90%. So we're reducing the number of ecosystems on Earth, and that has an impact obviously on the species diversity and the genetic diversity as well. Just some stats on biodiversity loss. Global wildlife populations have fallen by about 69% on average since the 1970s. And certain portions of the planet are doing worse than others. So 94% reduction in biodiversity in these areas in green, especially in the rainforests. Freshwater populations have really seen a huge decline also. So about 83% of freshwater species have seen a decline. Freshwater organisms are really more subjected to things like pollution, runoff, habitat destruction. Obviously, we're doing terrible things in the oceans as well, but we're not building things in the middle of the ocean. We're destroying wetlands at an alarming rate, and that's what's having the impact on the freshwater species. Here are some of the reasons for loss of biodiversity. Habitat loss, meaning destruction of those habitats through development, grading. The biggest cause of that, as we're going to talk about in a minute, is meat production. Overfishing, overhunting, acidification of the oceans, pollution, bringing in introduced or invasive species, and global climate change. These are all reasons why the biodiversity is declining. Just starting with this first one, habitat loss. These are the major causes of habitat destruction. The number one reason, these are really connected, is agriculture, but mostly growing food for livestock. And then the direct impact of raising those animals for meat. And we're going to talk more about that in a minute. Logging, which means, cutting down trees for wood. Development, so building roads and shopping centers and homes. Mineral extraction, including extraction of minerals for batteries that go into hybrid and electric vehicles. That has a huge impact. And of course, landfills. everything we use that we throw away has to go somewhere. So we use a big percentage of our country in particular, a lot of land is used to throw away our trash. Looking at where that deforestation is taking place, really the tropical regions are the main area of deforestation. And that has huge impacts on us as humans because the trees take in the carbon dioxide that we are releasing through burning fossil fuels. Those trees actually also produce the oxygen that we're breathing. So without the oxygen that we're breathing and without them taking in the CO2 that we're producing, this really causes a huge imbalance on the planet. Okay, not to mention the loss of biodiversity and how devastating that is to the planet. Most of our pharmaceutical products that save human lives come from plants. Those plants are mostly in these tropical areas, and most of them are still undiscovered. A lot of our human cancers and other diseases could be dramatically helped by these plant products that we haven't even been able to discover yet in these regions. Plus, it's just really an ethical issue of why would we destroy our planet? Who are we to do that? Why are we the ones who get to decide that we're going to eliminate 80% of the species on this planet? And it's mostly driven by agriculture and growing food for the livestock that we raise. So that takes us to the next issue, and that is meat production. So let's just agree that for now we're going to put aside the whole ethical issue of how we treat animals that are raised for meat, packing them into these pens where they're never able to walk. Look at these pigs. We're going to not even talk about that. Right now we're going to focus on the environmental impact of meat production. We have a huge global demand for meat, and cow production in particular is something that we probably can't afford as a planet to do for much longer. It's really a luxury that in the year 2025, the earth can no longer afford. Cattle ranching is the #1 cause of deforestation in every Amazon country. It accounts for 91% of current deforestation. They slash and burn the forest. The cows come in and graze. And all of the nutrients were tied up in those trees. And now that soil becomes infertile and can no longer grow food for the cows. So they have to move on to another area. So they're either directly grazing the cows here or they're planting the grain that those cows need to eat. We get a lot of our beef in the US from Brazil. Brazil is raising those cows on land that used to be rainforest. So again, I'm not going to talk about how we humanely treat these cows. That is an issue in itself that we could discuss. But let's just look at the impact of meat production for a minute. On our planet right now, CO2 emissions we know are changing our global climate. 13% of those emissions come from vehicles, 18% come from livestock. And that's just in the United States. Methane, which is the most destructive gas in terms of global climate change, it's 82 times more destructive than carbon dioxide. Most of that, 65%, comes from livestock, in particular cows. Looking globally, it's estimated that 2 acres of rainforest are destroyed every minute on this planet for livestock production. It's responsible for about 91% of rainforest destruction. To me, this is the one that really hits home. 82% of starving children live in areas where food is fed to livestock. And 50% of all global grain is fed to livestock. As we start thinking about how we're going to feed 9 billion people on this planet. How will we find enough food to feed that many people? Will we be able to do that if we are feeding that food to cows? This one to me is hugely significant. This is just in the United States. If the grain currently fed to livestock in the United States was instead used to feed people, it could theoretically feed nearly 800 million people. And that's just in the United States. Looking at greenhouse emissions by protein source, you can see that beef have the hugest impact in terms of CO2 released per 100 grams of protein produced. So this isn't just, I mean, people say, oh, well, but a cow is so much bigger than a chicken. Of course it's going to release more carbon dioxide. No, this is per 100 grams of protein that they produce. Lamb is number 2. Believe it or not, prawns, farming shrimp, has a huge CO2 release. Dairy cows. So the first one is just looking at cows being raised for beef. Raising cows for dairy products also has a big impact. And then next would be pigs. Poultry is a lot lower down the list, including egg production. So it's interesting to look at it from that perspective. Water use. The water footprint of a cow. This is per 1 pound of meat produced, and now we're out of the metric system back to the way we measure things in the US. But per pound of meat, 1,850 gallons of water used for every 1 pound of beef produced. And you can just go down the list here. Lamb, pigs, chickens. You can see that livestock production uses the majority of the Earth's agriculture land. So this is how much food we grow for the livestock versus how much food we grow for humans. So land use per 1,000 kilocalories, you can see beef has the largest footprint, followed closely by lamb. And then dairy cows are pretty high up there too. If you look at poultry, much lower. So this is really kind of showing the same thing. Land use. This is really, the basic American diet, which is eating a lot of meat, and compare that to this person in the middle here is reducing their meat usage. They're not cutting meat completely out of their diet. They're just really saying, okay, 1 or 2 days a week, I'm not going to eat meat. I'm going to reduce my meat usage. And then vegetarian and vegan. So 6 tips for eating more sustainably as a human on this earth who should be concerned about how we're going to feed 9 billion people. Eat more plants. So really just cutting meat out of your diet 1 or 2 days a week could have a significant impact, especially if you reduce your beef consumption. Beef is the most important thing you can cut out of your diet to not only make you healthier, but also make the planet healthier. Reducing your dairy consumption. Boy, for me, I'll be honest, that's a tough one for me. I love cheese, but just even cutting it out 1 or 2 days a week can make a big difference. We're going to talk about plastic wrap in a few minutes, but eating in season, meaning they're not having to truck and refrigerate and move things considerable distances, which reduces pollution. So those are all things to consider. Okay, the next topic, plastics. Well, we all know that we have a huge trash problem, but plastics in particular are horrible for our planet and horrible for our health. I'm going to show you some examples of that in a minute. But this is just a little small image of what's called the Great Pacific Garbage Patch. 620,000 square miles of trash that swirls on the Pacific Ocean between California and Hawaii. I mean, that is pretty disgusting. But plastics in particular are persistent and accumulating. They can take hundreds or even thousands of years to break down. And when they do break down into smaller pieces, they become what are called microplastics, which can be ingested by wildlife and us. So, not only through the food chain, but just directly getting contaminated with them. Marine animals become entangled, suffer injuries, drown. Plastic ingestion by wildlife leads to starvation, internal injuries, spread of toxins, contaminates soil and water, and production of plastics is contributing to global climate change. Ways you can reduce your plastic usage. Obviously, in California, you have to pay to get a reusable bag. So honestly, I'll tell you, in my own house, we're just creatures of comfort, right? Like we want to do what's quick and easy. And for many years I knew that I should be using a reusable bag, but you forget. So you go to the grocery store and you're like, yeah, give me another plastic bag. Well, by the end of the month, we would have this huge accumulation of them and we would just have to throw them away because we would have so many. I mean, I remember at my grandma's house, she had a hall closet you would open and the whole thing was just floor to ceiling plastic bags. So think how our lives have changed now that we're forced to use the reusable bag. I'm kind of thankful for it. Carrying a reusable water bottle. That has been huge in our house. Not having to go buy the plastic bottles of water, but also just recognizing that plastic, those chemicals get into your water and you're drinking those cancer-causing chemicals. When that water bottle gets heated up or cools down, that is poisoning your body. So let's just start with that. But then add to the fact that that plastic bottle is going to go somewhere in the environment and it's not going to break down for thousands of years and it's going to contaminate the environment. Bringing a reusable water bottle is huge. In our house, if you own a house, you can go to Costco and get the reverse osmosis water system to hook up in your kitchen. That water tastes every bit as good as a bottled water. And that has really changed how much plastic we use at our house. If you live in an apartment, if you have to buy the plastic, buy the bigger container you buy, the better, because you're using less plastic when you buy the giant container of water versus the smaller individual use ones. So obviously, all these other ways that we can reduce our plastic usage. Looking at health concerns, there was actually an article in CNN just this week, common household plastics linked to thousands of global deaths from heart disease. So synthetic chemicals called phthalates found in consumer products such as food storage containers, shampoo, makeup, perfume, children's toys may have contributed to more than 10% of all global mortality from heart disease among women and men 55 through 64. That's pretty wild. Phthalates have been linked to in earlier studies with reproductive problems such as genitalia malformations, undescended testes in baby boys, lower sperm counts, lower testosterone levels in adult males, asthma, childhood obesity, and cancer. There have been lots of studies linking the chemicals in plastics to cancer. Often called the everywhere chemicals, phthalates are added to PVC plumbing pipes. So that's what brings our water into our house. Vinyl flooring, rain and stain resistant products, medical tubing, garden hoses, children's toys to make the plastic more flexible and harder to break, food packaging, detergents, clothing, furniture, automotive parts, shampoo, soap, hairspray, cosmetics to make fragrances last longer. People are exposed when they breathe the contaminated air, eat or drink food that comes in contact with plastic. So please, when you're cooking food in your home, especially in your microwave, if it comes in a plastic container from the store, dump it into a glass container to heat it in the microwave. Store things in the refrigerator in glass containers rather than plastic. Not only are you doing something good for the environment by not using that plastic, but you're also doing something good for your health. So, two good reasons to reduce your plastic usage. Okay, the next one, something you might not think about all the time, but that is the environmental impact of palm oil production. Boy, there's a lot of verbiage here, a lot of words on this slide, but I just want to tell you that palm oil production is really contributing to habitat destruction on this planet. Deforestation, clearing tropical rainforest to grow palm trees for palm oil production. It's resulting in widespread habitat loss for a lot of endangered organisms, orangutans, tigers, elephants, rhinos, all the greenhouse gases that are emitted when they burn the forest to plant the palm trees, the loss of biodiversity, the pollution, the water pollution and air pollution that occurs, the soil erosion. It's really, really bad. If you look at the countries that produce most of the palm oil, Indonesia is the yellow one and Malaysia is the red one. Those are the two biggest producers of palm oil. Look at this picture. All of this rainforest was cleared to plant palms for palm oil production. That is shocking. You can see that there are 193 endangered and vulnerable species that are affected by the palm oil production. And it's in more products than you can possibly imagine. And they use a lot of pretend names so that you don't know that they're actually in there. I'll tell you, Girl Scout cookies have palm oil. A lot of products that we use that are prepackaged use palm oil. Not eating all this processed prepackaged food will make you live longer, okay? And it's also better for the earth. So, number one, we shouldn't be eating this stuff anyway. It's really, really bad for us. Yeah, I know a lot of it tastes really good, but we shouldn't be eating it anyway for a lot of health reasons. But then it's also really, really bad for the environment. If you want to reduce your palm oil usage because you're concerned about the planet, there is an app you can get where you can scan products and they will tell you on this app if those products actually use palm oil or not, because it's hidden with a lot of pretend names so that you don't know that that's what you're actually doing. Okay, the next one, sunscreen. If you're gonna go swim in the ocean, especially in areas with coral reefs, please check the kind of sunscreen you're using because the chemicals can kill the coral reefs. These are really productive, biodiverse ecosystems that are vanishing at an alarming rate on our planet. The major cause is actually global warming, CO2 in the atmosphere, and other global greenhouse gases, but you can see what sunscreen can do. Healthy coral versus dead coral. These are the chemicals you should be checking for. I'll let you read them. But if you use mineral sunscreen when you're going to go in the ocean, it's a huge help. So if you're just going to lie on the beach or lie at the pool, who cares what kind of sunscreen you use? Well, you should, because it can also contribute to cancer in humans. So these chemical sunscreens are really, really bad for you. I know my dermatologist tells me just don't wear them. So I've switched to the mineral sunscreens. Yeah, they're gross. They're thick and white and they don't look attractive, but you know what? Neither does skin cancer. So you can pick your battle there, but I try to wear sun protective clothing as much as possible. So wearing, the what are they called? Rash guards. Any type of long sleeve shirt or anything to cover your body as much as possible, hats versus just slathering on the sunscreen. But just something else we can do to make a little bit of a difference. Okay, this is one a lot of people don't think about, but we're all guilty of that. And this is fast fashion and textile waste. So especially with internet shopping, we are all creatures of convenience. And what happens is if you buy something on Amazon and you return it and it's clothing, most of that gets thrown away. They don't reuse that stuff. They don't, from a business model standpoint, it costs them more to take that item, check it to make sure it hasn't been worn, make sure the tags are on it, restock it, sell it to somebody else. They're not doing that. They're throwing it away. And most of it's getting sent to other countries for them to manage our textile waste. So you can see that the fashion industry accounts for about 10% of global carbon emissions and 20% of global wastewater from textile dyeing. Textile waste is non-biodegradable for the most part. It ends up in landfills. It's contributing to the microplastics problem because a lot of those fabrics aren't 100% cotton. And fast fashion is this business model that relies on cheap, speedy production of low quality clothing. So it's stuff that's not going to last. It's going to look cute for a couple of months and then you're going to throw it away because you can't even donate it because it just looks like crap at that point. So monumental amounts of clothing are dumped on developing countries. And right now it's estimated that 46 million tons of discarded clothes in 2023 were dumped and being sent to other countries. So some big impacts on the planet that fast fashion is having: water consumption, water pollution, contributing to global carbon emissions, textile waste, and chemical usage. That as chemicals can contaminate water sources and really hurt the environment. Mounds and mounds and mounds of discarded clothing. Again, a lot of it being sent to other countries. How can we make a difference? Well, obviously buying your clothes secondhand, reselling clothing. Don't return online purchases. If you have the option to return something at the store, do it. So if you order something online from Target, take it back to Target in person because they will restock it and resell it. If you buy something from Nordstrom, Nordstrom Rack, any of those stores where you can have the option to return it in person, please do that because then those clothes get resold rather than going to the landfill. Doing things to make your clothes last longer, such as air drying them, washing them in cold, does really help. This picture kind of says the same thing. Limit your laundering, choose air drying, invest in quality clothing that's going to last longer so you're not throwing your clothes away every year. Okay, one more. No, I think I have two more. Do I have two more? No, I have three more. Sorry. Okay, decline of pollinators. Pollinators are incredibly important. Over 3/4 of our crops that we eat, our food plants, require pollinators. There's a dramatic decline in pollinators on our planet. And we need to really be aware of this because we could lose most of our crop plants if these pollinators go away. This is not something humans can come in and replicate with an artificial means. So please, please be aware of the toxins that you put into the environment that kill pollinators, especially pesticides. So ways you can help pollinators: plant native flowering plants, don't use pesticides in your garden, provide shallow water bowls with rocks in hot summer months so they can have a little place to take a break and drink a little bit of water. But really mostly planting these native plants and not using pesticides in your garden will help the pollinators. Just a little something you can do to help the earth. Eating sustainable fish. Overfishing on our planet is a huge, huge problem. I don't know if you watch any travel shows, but if you see, a show about a beautiful coastal town in Italy and you see they'll go out on a boat with a local fisherman, or they'll show the local fisherman coming in with the catch of the day and they have one or two fish on the boat. And you just go, well, yeah, but what do you think? We can just have these big nets for all of eternity and just catch everything, and a lot of it isn't even what you wanted to catch, and you just discard it, or you inadvertently catch all these other things that that you didn't even want to catch. Did I just say that same thing? The most important thing we can do in this category is to eat sustainable fish. And the Monterey Bay Aquarium does a really great job of educating people on sustainable seafood. I encourage you to go on their website. It's constantly changing. But if you have any questions about the kinds of seafood you should be avoiding versus which are okay to eat, this is a great source of information. So you can look at the green, yellow, and red. Red is avoid. Yellow is, maybe you want to limit your use of that. And then the best choices are the ones in green. Okay. This one people are going to hate me for, but outdoor cats. Please don't let your cats roam outdoors. First of all, they're going to get eaten by a coyote if you live in San Diego. Chances are pretty good. But secondly, they're very environmentally destructive. They kill a huge number of birds, reptiles, mammals, and amphibians on our planet when people let their cats just roam free, especially in San Diego, where they go into the canyons and they just cause major environmental destruction. I know in Hawaii, this is a huge, huge problem because they don't have predators of cats. So cats do roam outside and they kill so much wildlife. It's really sad. It's not just the direct impact of them killing that wildlife, they're now taking the food source away from the native animals that need those prey for their own diets. So it's kind of that everything is connected concept. So they compete with native predators for food resources. So they're not just directly impacting the animals that they're eating, it's this food web effect. When cats reduce the prey base, native predators are forced to leave the area, compete with each other, or starve. And outdoor cats also transmit diseases to other people. I mean, other people. Well, that is true. They do transmit diseases to people through their poop, but they transmit diseases to other animals through their poop. Okay, so those are some things that you can think about that you could do on just a small scale that could make a difference. And, we've all grown up with this reduce, reuse, recycle, but I'm going to tell you right now, I can almost guarantee that most of the stuff we're throwing in our recycle bin is just going in the landfill. It's too expensive to recycle. The third world countries that used to take our recycling on as their problem, that we used to just ship it all to, they're not even taking it anymore. So most of it's just going into the landfill. Reduce and reuse are our two best options, especially reducing. We all could benefit from reducing the amount of stuff we use on this planet. Not just financially, but just think about how simple our lives would be if we reduce the amount of clutter around us, reduce the number of things we buy things in reduced packaging, really thinking about what we're using and what we're discarding is really, really important. And just a couple of quotes that really resonated with me. The greatest threat to our planet is the belief that someone else will save it. I've given you some ideas of things that you can do in your own lives to make a small difference or even a big difference. And this is one that I saw when I was pretty young. And we don't know really if Chief Seattle actually said this, but it really strikes me as something that we should all remember. And that is whatever befalls the earth befalls the son of the earth. Man did not weave the web of life. He is merely a strand of it. Whatever he does to the web, he does to himself. So I hope that some of you will go on to study more topics in ecology and more topics related to the environment. That is it for today. Thanks.